He said that night started normally, peacefully, the way any ordinary night begins. The two of them in the room, chatting nonsense, laughing at silly things, that background silence that makes the house seem bigger but doesn't bother you. Until the lights flickered once. It wasn't a power outage. There was no noise from a street lamp, nothing exploding. Just a quick, dry flicker, but strange enough to make his brother freeze mid-sentence and turn his face towards the hallway. Outside, no lights were on, just an entire hallway, shrouded in a darkness so heavy it seemed to occupy space, as if it had a body, as if it breathed slowly. He thought his brother was just trying to be funny until he saw his look. It wasn't a joke. It was the look of someone recognizing a voice that shouldn't exist there. He asked what it was. His brother raised his hand, asking for silence, and that's when he heard it, a weak, scratchy whisper right at the edge of the door, as if someone was speaking with their mouth pressed against the wood. It was a thin, wet voice, difficult even to understand, but enough to chill the blood. The brother tilted his head and asked, "Did you hear that?" He replied no, that it was just the two of them there. And then he heard the phrase that marked everything, "He's calling you." His breath caught. He ran to the light switch, pressed it once, twice, 3 times. The light flickered, lit up halfway, too weak to push out the darkness. It seemed as if the light itself was afraid to cross the room. The brother, who was sitting on the bed, stood up slowly, as if someone outside had commanded him to. His eyes didn't blink. They didn't look at him, or at the floor, or at the wall. They were fixed on a point in the darkness at the door, precisely where there was nothing. That's when the worst part came. The brother began to answer. Low, almost silently, but he answered. The sentences came out broken, as if half were his, and the other half came from someone behind the door, delayed, like an echo that shouldn't exist. He told him to stop, said, "Don't talk to that." But his brother turned his face with a smile that wasn't his, a thin, wide, almost stitched smile, and replied in a double voice, like two people using the same mouth. But he spoke first. After that sentence, he swears the house changed its atmosphere. The air became heavier, colder, but not that normal cold that makes your skin crawl. It was a cold that seemed to go straight to the bones, as if someone were sucking the heat from inside the body. The darkness at the door gained depth, as if it had created a second plane inside. It wasn't just darkness anymore, it was presence. His brother took another step towards the hallway, but he didn't seem to be walking of his own accord. It was as if something had lassoed his intention by the neck and was pulling, guiding every movement. He shouted his brother's name, but it was no use. The other was listening to something much older, much more important than any human voice. The light in the room grew even dimmer, the lamp making a low hum, as if it were being squeezed. The brother stopped right at the edge between the room and the hallway, half his body immersed in the darkness that swallowed the air around him. And then he spoke, not to him, but to whatever was outside. "I remembered." That sentence cut through the atmosphere. Remembered what? There was no memory that could explain that tone, that way of speaking, as if he were rediscovering something lost long ago. He tried to hold his brother's shoulder, but the sensation of touching the skin was wrong. It was cold, rigid, vibrating inside, as if another heart were beating there, with a different rhythm. When his brother turned his face very slowly, his eyes no longer seemed the same. There was distance, as if someone were behind him, looking through them. The brother then blurted out, "He wants to talk to you." A chill ran down his spine. "Who?" he asked. The answer came with a slow, ritualistic smile, almost like a practiced gesture. "What is in the dark?" Before he could react, the darkness behind his brother moved, but not like an animal or a person. It was space itself breathing. The air shifted, the floor creaked, The shadow seemed to trickle across the floor and climb the walls as if it were liquid. It was at that moment that he heard the other voice for the first time. It didn't come from his brother, nor from the hallway, nor from the door. It came from the darkness itself, scratching the air, thin, rusty, as if it had forgotten how to speak. And this voice pronounced his full name slowly, syllable by syllable, in the way only family knew. His body froze. No one outside the house knew that full name, much less the correct way to say it. His brother smiled deeply, as if the smile had been born from within, and pushed his face outwards. "He sees you," he said. The darkness advanced a little further, covering the doorframe, rising as if it had fingers, trying to reach the ceiling. The light almost went out. His leg wouldn't respond. Only then did he understand. It wasn't his body that was failing. It was the house holding on, as if the structure were helping that which lived in the dark. His brother whispered without moving his mouth, in the same double voice, "He wants to come in." And at that exact moment, everything went dark. Light, sound, air, as if the world around him had been switched off. When he came to, he was on the bedroom floor, not knowing how much time had passed. His vision slowly returned, first blurs, then outlines. The door was now wide open, and the hallway was a dark tunnel pulling his gaze inside. His brother was no longer there. He called out, but there was no answer. That's when he heard his voice coming from the back room, the perfect, clear voice, exactly the same as always. "Come here." He froze instantly. He had just left that room. He was sure it was empty. Even so, the voice kept calling. The tone was intimate, the tone his brother used when he wanted to say something just between the two of them. And, as he backed away, the house began to smell of dampness, wet wood, old earth, as if everything there had suddenly aged. The door to their bedroom was open, as if inviting. From inside, footsteps came. But they weren't normal footsteps. They lacked the right weight, rhythm, and impact of a human foot. They were too light, too long, too dragging, as if something were testing the way that body walked. Then came the breathing, deep, moist, irregular, as if the air were being drawn by a chest that didn't exist. He tried to run away, but his body stiffened. The breathing behind him quickened, almost excited, as if the thing had realized that he had finally understood that it wasn't his brother. Suddenly, the voice began to come from everywhere, from the room, the hallway, the ceiling, the floor. The whole house repeating, "Come, I'm here," as if the walls had memorized his voice. He recoiled until his back hit the living room wall, and that's when he noticed his own shadow on the floor. Or rather, what should have been his shadow. The silhouette was distorted, elongated, with arms that were too long and its head tilted at an impossible angle. He was standing still, but the shadow was moving. Slow, curved, as if something were dragging itself across the ceiling directly above him. Then he heard the sound of fingernails slowly tracing the plaster, scratching the paint as if marking the path. The shadow stretched to his shoulder, leaned against it, and the voice, now whispering directly in his ear, said, "I found you first." That was enough to send him running. He ran without looking back, entered his mother's room, locked it, and leaned his whole body against the door as the light footsteps arrived from the other side, knocking 3 times, in the same rhythm his brother used when he was a child. Inside, his heart felt like it was going to break his ribs. Outside, the entity repeated in its now perfect voice, "Open up! I am your brother!" But it was his mother who woke up, not because of the voice, but because she felt the mattress sink beside her, as if someone heavy had sat there silently, staring into the darkness. When he turned his face, he saw a shape folded over itself, made of dense shadow, studying every detail of her face as if it were memorizing it. Sometimes, for a second, the shadow seemed to have her son's mouth. The next second, the mouth dissolved into something long and curved, trying to imitate, failing, trying again. The narrator broke down the door, entered, saw the indentation in the mattress and felt, right at face level, an invisible warmth, as if a face were pressed against his without appearing. A thin, cold, overly long finger passed over his shoulder, marking its territory. When he turned, he fell to the floor. In the hallway, the door to their room was open, and inside, a contorted silhouette, supported in 4 awkward places, head crooked, arms too long, breathing as if the air were too heavy. The thing left the room in a soundless step, gliding. And, although it didn't touch the ground, its shadow down there was perfect, with weight, as if it were a real body. The mother began to pray softly, and the entity simply stopped, turned its head, and began to imitate the prayer word for word, in the same tone, the same rhythm, as if it had copied her faith as well. It was then that from somewhere deep inside the house, far away, weak, torn, the two heard the brother's true voice. "Help me." At that instant, the entity froze. Its head snapped back as if it had heard a forbidden sound. Its whole body trembled and it took a step back, not out of fear, but as if it were defending a territory. The brother's voice sounded like a call coming from below, not from the basement, not from the ground floor, but from a place the house should never have. They ran to the kitchen and found the floor open, as if someone had ripped up the floorboards during the night. A narrow, deep gap opened up there. When the narrator illuminated it with his cell phone, he first saw only the hole. Then an eye. Not the creature's eye, but the human eye of the brother, tired, terrified, looking up as if seeing the sky after a long time, trapped in darkness. "It pulled me, tried to get in. I held on as long as I could," he cried. The narrator reached out to pull him, and it was at that moment that the entity descended from the ceiling, trickling down the wall as if spilled, until it stood behind him in its complete form. An elongated body, arms that almost touched the ground, fingers as thin as needles, a head tilted, unsure of where up was, and in the middle a face that couldn't quite form, trying to copy features, trying to steal identity. It advanced quickly, silently, inhumanly. He pulled his brother out of the void at the last second, while the thing's roar made the ground vibrate and the walls crack. The mother, without thinking, threw herself in front of them and shouted their true names aloud, complete, whole, as if she were calling back everything that still belonged to her sons. The entity froze in mid-air, as if it had struck something invisible. The scream that followed wasn't pure rage, but recognition and expulsion, as if the true name were a blade pushing it out. The shadow began to dissolve from its hands, rising up its arms, reaching its twisted head, which vibrated as if being ripped from reality. The house trembled, the lights shattered, and with a single dry snap, the thing vanished, as if it had never existed there. The silence that followed wasn't normal. It was the silence of a place that had just survived something that shouldn't touch the world of the living. The brother wept, embracing the narrator. The mother trembled, unable to speak, and the walls, for the first time that night, cast no shadow whatsoever. Not even theirs. The next day, with everything seemingly calm, the narrator passed by the living room mirror. He glanced quickly, distractedly, and continued walking. But something made his chest tighten, and he took a step back. For a fraction of a second, he saw his own reflection smiling to itself, a thin, strange smile that he wasn't making. He blinked. The face in the glass returned to normal, serious, tired, as if nothing had happened. He approached slowly, stared at his own eyes in the mirror, and asked almost in a whisper only to himself, "Are you still there?" From within the reflection, deep in the glare, an almost imperceptible whisper answered, scratching his ear from the inside like the first voice of that night. I learned quickly. And since then, he has never been sure if, when he speaks to the mirror, he is still only speaking to himself.